The rescue dog understands the ex-husband's deepest pain 4 years after the divorce. A small white farmhouse stood alone at the end of a gravel road in western Pennsylvania. Early spring 2026. The snow had mostly melted, but patches of ice still rested beneath the pine trees beside the driveway. The wind moved softly through the empty fields behind the house. Hanging beside the front door was an old blue dog leash. The leather was cracked near the handle, worn smooth from years of use. It moved gently against the wooden wall whenever the wind touched it. Nobody had used the leash in almost 4 years. Inside the farmhouse, near the kitchen window, sat a faded military photograph in a silver frame. The man in the photo looked young, serious, and tired all at once. Beside the frame rested a pair of reading glasses and a ceramic coffee mug with a chipped handle. The coffee inside had gone cold hours ago. No one was sitting at the kitchen table. The only sound came from the old golden retriever sleeping near the back door. His name was Rusty. At 13 years old, Rusty moved slowly now. His fur had turned pale around the face and his back legs shook slightly whenever he stood up. But even in old age, his eyes stayed sharp, always watching, always listening. Especially when it came to Daniel Harper. What does it mean when a dog understands a person better than the people around them? And what happens when the one person who truly understands the silence inside a man is no longer his wife? This is the story of Claire Harper, Daniel Harper, and a rescue dog who spent years quietly guarding a pain nobody spoke about aloud. Claire met Daniel in the summer of 1998. She was 31 years old and worked at a bookstore in a quiet Pennsylvania town where everybody knew each other's business before sunset. Daniel was 46 and owned a small repair garage outside town near an old railroad crossing. He was polite, quiet, careful with words, the kind of man who answered questions simply and never volunteered extra details. Claire first noticed him when her car broke down near the garage during a thunderstorm. Daniel fixed the radiator himself and refused to charge her for the labor. 3 days later, he asked if she wanted coffee. They were married less than a year after that. For a long time, their marriage looked peaceful from the outside. No screaming fights, no dramatic betrayals, no broken dishes or slammed doors. But there were things Claire slowly noticed over the years. Daniel never sat with his back facing a restaurant entrance. He hated fireworks. And almost every night around 3 in the morning, Claire would wake up and find his side of the bed empty. Sometimes she found him sitting on the porch staring into the darkness. Sometimes he stood silently in the backyard looking toward the trees, and sometimes he simply sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he never drank. Claire asked questions during the early years. Daniel always gave the same answer: just can't sleep. So eventually she stopped asking, not because she stopped caring,
but because she understood there were parts of her husband that had never fully returned home from somewhere else. Daniel had served overseas during the Gulf War. He rarely mentioned it. There was one locked metal box in the basement workshop that Claire never touched. There were nights Daniel woke up sweating from dreams he could not explain. And there were moments when sudden loud sounds made his entire body tense without warning. Still, they built a life together. Years passed quietly. Then, in 2017, everything changed because of a dog. Claire had not wanted another animal after their old shepherd died years earlier. But one rainy Saturday afternoon, Daniel unexpectedly asked if she wanted to visit the county rescue shelter, just to look. The shelter sat outside town beside a feed mill and smelled like wet concrete and disinfectant. Most of the dogs barked wildly as visitors passed. One jumped against the kennel door so hard it rattled the metal frame. But in the last kennel near the back wall was a large golden retriever mix, lying silently on the floor. He did not bark. He barely lifted his head. The card attached to the kennel said, "Male, estimated age 3. Found wandering near highway rest stop. Extremely anxious. Does not respond well to loud noises." Claire knelt beside the kennel. The dog looked at her only once before lowering his eyes again. Daniel stood beside her quietly. For nearly 2 minutes, nobody spoke. Then, the dog slowly stood up. He walked toward Daniel. Not Claire, not the shelter worker standing nearby. Daniel. The dog pressed his nose gently against the bars and sat down directly in front of him. Daniel froze. Claire looked up at her husband and noticed something strange in his face. Not fear, not sadness exactly. Recognition, as if the dog understood something invisible. "We'll take him," Daniel said softly. That was how Rusty